Shri N.N. Vora, Justice Geeta Mittal, Professor Achyut Chetan, distinguished guests, friends, and trustees of the IIC. On behalf of WISCOMP and the India International Center, it is a pleasure to welcome you this evening to this evening's talk by Professor Achyut Chetan on reclaiming the founding mothers of the Indian Republic. There is a happy synchronicity for us today, the conjoining of the celebrations of 75 years of the adoption of our Constitution and 25 years of WISCOMP, a South Asian initiative that strives to facilitate and nurture the leadership of women in the public sphere in our region. So it is an added privilege to have on the days, along with the speaker, two extraordinary people, or should I say personalities, whose contributions towards advancing and protecting the rights and entitlements of Indian citizens cannot be overstated. Shri N.N. Vora, civil servant extraordinaire, former governor Jammu and Kashmir, defense secretary, and former president and now life trustee of the IIC, has been the voice of probity, rectitude, and ethics in the public domain, speaking and writing frankly and voicing what needs to be said to the keepers of our democracy in the making, and also to those who helm structures of governance. He served the government of India as its interlocutor on Jammu and Kashmir, where he led sustained dialogue efforts with a wide spectrum of stakeholders in the region. Mr. Vora has held several other key positions in the Government of India. In addition to Home Secretary, he was Principal Secretary to Prime Minister Gujral, as well as eminent positions in the Government of Punjab. He was a member of the country's first National Security Advisory Board, Chairman of the National Task Force on Internal Security, founding co-chairman of the Indo-European Union Roundtable, and so many others. He's currently visiting fellow at Queen Elizabeth House at the University of Oxford. An avid mountaineer, he served as the president of the Indian Mountaineering Federation. And in recognition of his extraordinary contributions to civil service, Shri Vora was conferred the Padma Vibhushan in 2007. Many in the room are familiar with the Watershed N.N. Vora Committee report that drew attention to corrupt practices that erode our democracy. He was also very intimately involved with the highly commended volume of the IIC, The Working of the Indian Constitution. Shri Vora will make a few preliminary remarks. Thank you, sir, for being here with us today, and also thank you to Mrs. Usha Vora, a distinguished former civil servant herself. And now Justice Geeta Mittal, former Chief Justice of J&K, who I think was sworn in as Chief Justice by Shri Vora during his tenure. It's a happy coincidence, but they say nothing is coincidental. She was acting Chief Justice of the Delhi High Court, an indefatigable champion of the rights of women, both within the courtroom and outside, as mediator and arbitrator. She also heads the Supreme Court appointed Committee on Relief and Rehabilitation Efforts for victims of ethnic and gender-based violence in Manipur, where she has initiated an array of livelihood generation and skilling schemes. She works tirelessly to educate, skill, and build leadership among young women, especially from the marginalized and underserved communities. She is the first woman chairperson of the Broadcasting Content Complaints Council and chairperson of the Vulnerable Witness Committee constituted by the Supreme Court of India. She has received several awards like Nari Shakti Puraskar, the P.N. Bhagwati Award, among several others. She has also been the force behind setting up several educational institutions, including the National Law University in Delhi. She is also famous for her no-nonsense, no-holds-barred approach towards the training of judicial officers and judges of the lower courts. She's an avid sports person. And I think you share that with Begum Aizaz Rasool, who actually set up the Hockey Federation in India. Am I right, Achyut? You would know better. And she was one of the founding mothers. Justice Mittal will make brief closing remarks at the end of the presentation. And between these eminent guests, our main speaker, Achyut, will shine the much needed light on the extraordinarily remarkable, gutsy women who were part of the constitution making firmament and who wrested both voice and agency in crafting democracy and claiming equal citizenship. And yet, their light has often been invisibilized or dimmed in the telling or the retelling of the history of constitution making. The achievement of scholars like Achyut Chetan, who was something of a pioneer in the field, has been to bring them out of the shadows of invisibility and silence. So to Achyut I will return later for a more formal introduction. But in much of the contemporary debate around issues like UCC, CAA, the role of the governor, minority rights, Waqf, sedition, judicial overreach, unlawful detention, NJAC 370, election protocols, etc., there is a tendency to quibble around the legalese rather than to redeem and recover the spirit of the Constitution, or be cognizant of the slippage between niti and nyay. Despite this, the celebration of the 75th year of the Constitution witnessed a rich repertoire of discussion and literature on the need to acquaint us, the people, of how and what it meant in we, the people, giving ourselves the Constitution. It did indeed open the accordion, and larger sections of citizens began to take greater interest in what was earlier regarded as the distinct prerogative of the courts. This was buttressed, especially from around 2015 onwards, with a very rich and spirited engagement by younger scholars, bringing innovative perspectives and primary research, letting the ideas breathe. To name a few, volumes like Ambedkar's Preamble by Akash Rathore, Building a Free India by Rakesh Bhatyabal, I think, who's here this evening, The Working of the Indian Constitution in the IIC Quarterly, The Colonial Constitution by Arghya Sengupta, A People's Constitution by Rohit Dey, India's Founding Moment by Madhav Khosla, Liberty After Freedom by Rohan Alva, We the People and Our Constitution by Neera Chandok, a remarkable piece of work. Who is Equal by Saurabh Kripal, The Equality Code. And then, of course, they followed in the footsteps of the earlier stalwarts in the field like Zoya Hassan, Rajiv Bhargav, and E. Sridharan. But they broke fresh ground. Enriching this repertoire has also been the latest ideas of the Indian Constitution by Speaking Tiger, edited by Harsh Mandir. Yet through much of these extremely laudable offerings, and of course there is Neerja Gopal Jayal here in our midst too, who's written extensively on the Constitution. Yet through much of these extremely laudable offerings, the role of our founding mothers, and I use that phrase with some caution because Achyut will in fact dismember that concept later, until Achyut Chetan's dedicated research stepped in to fill the gap and revive fresh interest in the role played by these remarkable women. Two young authors, Angelina Aribam and Akash Satyavali, picked up from then on to write a book called The 15th, an Amar Chitrakatha graphic novel and a dedicated issue in The Week, and few spirited articulations in national dailies spurred some interest. The Rajya Sabha brought out a compendium of their speeches in 2012, and that is available outside for any of you who might be interested, on a whole range of issues, from fundamental rights and directive principles, their positions on it, provincial elections, religious and educational institutions, constitutional remedies, detention, the working of the Constitution, a whole array of issues on which these women had spoken so evocatively, articulately, and also decisively. And what is interesting is that much of this went beyond what would conventionally be termed as the woman question. A memorable milestone in this process of shining the light was the riveting exhibition curated by Malavika Karlekar of CWDS here at the IIC, and a calendar Women at the Midnight Hour in 2018, containing the pictures of the 11 women members of the Constituent Assembly who actually signed the first copy of the Constitution. Interestingly, it could not then identify two of them, who later were recognized as Kamla Chaudhary and Purnima Banerjee. And Purnima Banerjee, as many of you would know, was an extremely vocal member of the Constituent Assembly, a very unconventional woman in her own right. And Achyut's research really helped identify who these women were. So today there is also a very vibrant grassroots movement that works with young people called Reclaim the Constitution, spearheaded by committed people like Vinay and Biraj Patnaik. You will see some of their work here, that creates memorabilia and curates exhibitions that, among other things, showcase the role of the founding mothers. Their contributions will complement the workshop that is being conducted tomorrow in this very venue. And it is also significant that a new statue of a sari-clad Lady Justice with scales and no blindfold and holding the Indian Constitution instead of the sword was recently installed in the Supreme Court premises. One cannot but mention the superb state-of-the-art Constitution Museum at the O.P. Jindal International University, inaugurated in November 2024, that gives the women founders due recognition. The dynamic VC, Professor Rajkumar, is here with us, and he really deserves our thanks and congratulations, and I really wish the IIC can arrange a trip for its members to visit this amazing, amazing exhibition, the likes of which I have not seen in India before. So thank you, Professor Rajkumar. Of the 299 members of the CA, the Constituent Assembly, who were present and signed the Constitution of Independent India, impressively adorned by artwork depicting centuries of Indian civilization, and who adopted and enacted and gave ourselves the Constitution, were 11 women members. Kamla Chaudhary, Sucheta Kripalani, G. Durgabai, after whom we propose to name the IIC library, Begum Qudsiya Ejaz Rasool, Purnima Banerjee, who was the sister of Aruna Asaf Ali, Dakshayani Velayudan, the first and only Dalit woman in the Constituent Assembly, Renuka Ray, Hansa Mehta, Rajkumari Amrit Kaur, Annie Masgreen, Amu Swaminathan, who was the mother of Lakshmi Sehgal of the INA. In all, 17 women had been part of the CA and the constitution making process, but there was attrition. Begum Jahanara Shahnawaz and Begum Shaista Sohrawardi Ikramullah stepped off when the Muslim League refused to participate in the CA and went to Pakistan, where they actually worked with the constitution making process of that country. Sarojini Naidu and Vijay Lakshmi Pandit resigned from the membership on being assigned roles as governor of the United Provinces and ambassador to Moscow, respectively. Leela Roy quit in protest against the partition of India. Malati Chaudhary, who had been nicknamed Tufani by none other than Mahatma Gandhi himself for her spirited work amongst tribals and landless rural populations, left, interestingly, because she felt somewhat overwhelmed and perhaps diffident in the face of the brilliant English oratory reflected in the somewhat elitist discourse of the founding fathers. Although she herself had had a modern education at Shantiniketan, and her mother was a graduate of the famous Bethune College, this group of women were a diverse group from varied religious, caste, and regional backgrounds, although mostly they did study at elite institutions. They often spoke against the grain in a different voice, and despite very disparate ideological positions within the larger women's movement, and especially the All India Women's Conference, founded in 1927, that had succeeded the Women India Association established by Annie Besant and Margaret Cousins, they displayed what Marx earlier called a common consciousness of a common kind. We are delighted that Manju Kak said she would be here today. She's currently the president of the All India Women's Conference. These women had pushed for women's suffrage for ending child marriage, securing women's rights to divorce and inheritance, especially Renuka Ray. But the founding mothers went far beyond these to engage with issues of constitutional safeguards and religious freedoms. Rajkumari Amrit Kaur and Hansa Mehta, for example. Fundamental rights, the laws of detention, arrest and dissent, freedom of expression, Purnima Banerjee, and the rights of detainees, interestingly, and the rights of those who were waiting to be tried. On intercommunity marriage, minority rights, Begum Aizaz Rasool, differential pay and safety at the workplace, Dakshayani, and trade union rights, again Purnima Banerjee, educational rights and responsibilities of state-aided institutions, the famous G. Durgabai. Against separate electorates, they were unanimous on one general achievement of the Constitution for a country that at that time was mostly illiterate and poor, universal adult franchise, which was perhaps the biggest leap of faith bequeathed to this newly independent country. They refused to accept the privileging of communal affiliations as a basis of national identity and clearly stated that their movement stood for a united, not uniform, but a united India. They were unanimous in their opposition to quotas, interestingly, and I wonder what they'd say about the 106th Amendment, which hopefully Chetan will speak to tomorrow, and what they would have said about the 73rd and 74th Amendments, for example. Contrary to the narrative that women had entered the CA thanks to the munificence of men or benevolent patriarchy, they had worked hard for their places in the assembly to actively shape the Constitution. We are all aware of how the youngest member at 34, Dakshayani Velayudhan, the only Dalit woman, also called the Stormy Petrel, had to brave stiff opposition to her inclusion by several male stalwarts of the Constituent Assembly. Another important shared characteristic was that they brought their rich experience from the women's movement, from women around the table. They didn't see themselves as a cloistered, privileged space. Not just women at the table, as we say in peace building jargon, but women around the table. And several of them had links with the international women's movements and built solidarities with compatriots who were already impactful in the international arena. Hansa Mehta's famous intervention at the UN in changing the language of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, leveraging Eleanor Roosevelt's chairpersonship, from all men are born free and equal to all human beings are born free and equal in Article 1 of the Universal Declaration is well known. In fact, there was a strong contingent of the sorority at international fora, from Hamsa Mehta to Sharifa Hamid to Sarojini Naidu to Vijayalakshmi Pandit and later Lakshmi and Menon. Interestingly, Amrit Kaur, a Christian, and Aizaz Rasool, a Muslim, took strong positions against the demands of their male minority representatives to foreground a minority identity, since women as a category had already been framed as representing a minority to protect their rights against discrimination. I will skip much of what I had said. So it's also important to remember that the importance of the performative in the women's movements, mobilization and advocacy strategy was initiated even at that time. So whether it was unfurling the national flag or singing Vande Mataram or Sare Jahan Se Acha or the first stanzas of Jana Gana Mana within the precincts of the CA, these feisty women seized the opportunity and gave to the proceedings a sense of occasion and celebration, lifting it beyond the purely cerebral. They recognized that continuous struggle was an essential aspect of democracy in the making. Sarojini Naidu's clarion call, "Till ye have battled with grief and fears and borne the conflict of dream-shattering years, wounded with fierce desire and worn with strife, children, ye have not lived, for this is life." And on August 15, 47, Hamsa Mehta, who was a member of the Fundamental Rights Subcommittee, suggested that as she presented the national flag to the CA on behalf of the women of India and had this to say supporting the objective resolutions. It will warm the hearts of many a woman to know that free India will mean not equality of status, but equality of opportunity. But was that dream betrayed? The 1974 Towards Equality reports gives you a completely different picture of the betrayal of the preamble, and especially the right to the equality of opportunity that women were promised in this constitution. But I leave that to Achyut. And there were, of course, many encomiums that came from all over the world, disparate worlds, from world leaders across continents and ideologies that extolled the extraordinary document, the Indian Constitution, that reflected the most exalted values of democracy, including the rule of law, transitioning a large mass of mostly illiterate and poor populations from subjects to citizens. So how did they forge the moral imagination they sought to embed in the Constitution? How did they overcome challenges to their elections? And once elected, what strategies and approaches did they employ? Our speaker for today believes that these and several compelling questions need to be answered before we can begin to appreciate the presence of these women at the founding moment. Professor Achyut in his talk will elaborate on these ideas, and he suggests that when, and I quote, when we the women of India gave to ourselves the Constitution, it was an act of self-gift, a gift they felt they deserved after years of struggle for their rights, social, political, and economic. So Professor Achyut himself earned his PhD for his research on the missing mothers of the Indian Constitution and the gender politics of its framing from Vishwa Bharati, the university, as you all know, established by Tagore. He taught English at Vishwa Bharati, he taught at St. Xavier's, and then he left it to join the Sidhu Kanhu Murmu University. He taught there with a commitment in Jharkhand. He taught there with a commitment to pedagogy as a means for social transformation in marginal areas, with a special conviction in constitutional morality for more than a decade. Chetan has been the recipient of the Ratan Tata Trust Fellowship at Jadavpur University, the Charles Wallace Trust India Fellowship, and at London School of Economics, and a Fulbright visiting fellowship at the Department of History at Columbia. And he has been a South Asian Studies Fellow at Cornell. He has taught history and literature at Columbia, at Texas, at Cornell, and several other universities, both elite and non-elite. Experiences of teaching at both ends of the spectrum strengthens his conviction in the dialogues between different academic spaces and academic disciplines, as well as in the emancipatory value of higher education in democratic societies. So WISCOMP is deeply grateful to Achyut. We know he's coming out of a very recent bereavement, and we are grateful that he has taken time to honor his commitment to be with us today. But before much ado, and I've already taken too much time, may I request Sri Vora to open the proceedings with his insights and valuable comments. Thank you, sir.
Dr. Meenakshi Gopinath, Justice Mittal, Professor Chetan, ladies and gentlemen, good evening. Dr. Gopinath has spoken at some length to lay the background of what we wish to discuss this evening, why we have gathered here this evening. But before I make any comments, I would like to compliment Dr. Gopinath for having for WISCOMP, which she has been leading for the last 25 years, thought it fit and necessary to celebrate 75 years of our Constitution, which by itself is an important objective. And in this process, she has brought to us here this evening a young, brilliant scholar, Professor Chetan, who will speak to us on the role of the founding mothers in the drafting of the Constitution. And tomorrow, the whole day, there will be a workshop series to further discuss various aspects of the Constitution, the role of women, their contributions, ideas, values, and so on. I particularly, once again, congratulate Dr. Gopinath for having steered, she's the founder president, steered WISCOMP for 25 years and done enormous amount of work to expose, to make people aware, and to propagate ideas and initiatives relating to the role of women, particularly in the realm of security, conflict management, peace. A lot of writing has been done, a lot of papers have been produced, books have been written, and she has been, as far as I can recall, when I was still in service and I retired, she was holding very useful workshops or seminars to discuss issues relating to our neighborhood, these are track 2, track 2.2 or 2.5 kind of discussions to consider various aspects of how we could do better in dealing with our neighbors. Now, I will not take much time in talking about Professor Chetan, except that Dr. Gopinath has spoken about his antecedents, his very good attainments, his a great teacher, but not only literature or history. He is taught here, he is taught abroad, and most of all, in the context of this evening, he written a wonderful book. He's taken a decade and more of research on this role of the founding mothers and the contribution to the Indian Republic, for contribution to the crafting of the Constitution. Their influence, I would say their feminist imagery, imagination, and their moral influence on the discourse on democracy, on liberty, on fraternity, on equity and justice. All these are very important facets, and the more we talk about them, I think the more useful it will be. Now, in passing, I would mention when I notice a certain element of regret, of sadness, that why have our founding mothers not been recognized, why they have not been noticed. I would go to the extent of saying that Justice Mittal is here today. She's been a very eminent Chief Justice of Kashmir, and she's in Delhi. What percentage of our population know the Constitution? Even lawyers who practice in the courts, even the higher courts, who practice law, how many of them actually know the Constitution? And about 2.5 years ago, in this very room, we started in the IIC a series of discussions, seminars, workshops, lectures to spread awareness about our Constitution. Awareness for the general public at large, for the intelligentsia who are interested in coming and listening to talks, lectures, and more specifically, a little more refined and a little more sophisticated discussions relating to certain issues about federalism, democracy, and so on. Now, this has been ongoing for the last almost 3 years now, and we set up a group, important group on federal democracy. This is convened and led by Professor Balveer Arora, who is with us here this evening, And this group has further set up 5 subgroups, each of which has been very active under known academic intellectuals, research scholars. So a great deal of work has been done, and I'm personally hopeful that by the end of this year, we should be seeing the outcome of all these, the hard work that has been done in the past 3 years. But I would say, as I said in this very room 3 years ago, that anything that can be done by institutions like ours, by WISCOMP, by others, to make aware the people at large, students, school students, college students, university people, scientists, technologists, bureaucrats, what our Constitution is all about. What are the principal values and the messages, the principles behind our Constitution? What is the framework of our governance? What are the directive principles of policy which are ingrained in our, non-justiciable in our Constitution? All these things are talked about very, very frequently, but my own perception is that in a country of our size, which is a large, diverse country with many communities, many languages, many religions, it is essential, if we had a deeper understanding, a more sensitive understanding of the Constitution, it would lead to more calm, peace, normalcy, and greater productivity, and besides our country being much better known in the Committee of Nations. Now, to go back to the history of our republic, and I would suggest to Professor Chetan, I had a very brief chat with him this evening, but not very extensive. He's done a lot of work to literally hunt out and to dig out facts and information about the personalities of the founding mothers, their contributions, their role in public life, and so on. But I have a feeling that we have not so far also done adequate amount of work on the role of women in the entire national freedom struggle, which is I think, in my own knowledge and perception, a much bigger role that they played, a very significant role. There are books on Amrit Kaur and Sarojini Naidu and Hansa Mehta, but there is no one single volume of the kind you've written. And I think, unless I am ignorant, there is already a book. It is worth doing. Now, to come back to the Constitution and our founding mothers, the total strength of the Constituent Assembly was 389. But the elected elements from the provincial assemblies were 292, out of which there were 277 fathers and only 15 mothers. Now 15 mothers got lost, they were changed, some of them dropped out, some were substituted. And as Dr. Gopinath mentioned, that it took Professor Chetan quite some effort to even recognize in the picture, which is in his book and is also advertised outside, publicized outside, who these ladies were. Some were easily recognizable, like Durgabai Deshmukh, Amrit Kaur and others, but 2 were not identified. And these are out of 15. The other 4 got lost. Some got nominated to the Rajya Sabha, became ministers. Some got foreign postings like Vijayalakshmi Pandit. Sarojini Naidu went as a governor and so on. So it's a very minuscule group, frankly. Out of 15, and 11 are signatories, and they were not treated well. They were given back seats in the back benches. They were not allowed to speak always. They were allowed to speak for 2 minutes, come to the point, sit down, and don't waste time, that kind of stuff, But nonetheless, on the documentation that Professor Chetan has produced and some else which I've read elsewhere, the memoranda, the notes which were put up, the introduction of clauses, amendments to the articles, fantastic legalistic jurisprudence, great capability, great argumentation. So it's a great thing that he has done, and it's a good thing that Dr. Gopinath has utilized this occasion to exemplify, illustrate what great work these ladies did in the years past and now forgotten. Now, I don't need to go into other details about the Constituent Assembly because Professor Chetan will be speaking to us, except that we have the debates in several publications. One is 9 volumes, one 12 volumes. These are all very wonderful pieces of history and are very readable also. And I wish that more and more people in our country, students, colleges, academicians, scholars could read them. But if it is possible, and I've been saying this, if it were practical, feasible, for stories to be written like, novel-like fiction, stories of depicting the story of our Constitution, what preceded the formulation of the Constitution, how it was formulated, and now we are celebrating 75 years, how we have actually worked the Constitution. Now, foreign scholars like Granville Austin and all have written very wonderful books, very insightful books, but I think we need to, within our own country, do some of this effort, make some of this effort, and make our Constitution better known to the people at large. Now, on the role of women, since Dr. Gopinath has made it her life's mission to do this work, to focus on empowerment, to see what are the infirmities, what are the blockages, and what are the constraints, I would say that if you look back into the entire history of our freedom struggle, there are not very many national leaders whom we talk about every day who were particularly fond of women coming to the forefront. And to some extent they were even discouraging. But there was one person in this entire period of our freedom struggle who was an open, aggressive, consistent, sustained votary of women coming to the center stage, and that was Mahatma Gandhi. In his non-violent freedom for national struggle, he surrounded himself by missionary ladies. He brought them forward, he made them speak, he made them get involved in villages, in panchayats, municipalities to do social reform, give speeches, write papers, and so on. And I remember there's in the writing somewhere, he had said on more than one occasion that he threatened that I should not attend any future legislature if there are not enough women in that legislature. But those words were lost because many of the things Mahatma Gandhi taught us were also lost. Now, the principles and the values ingrained in our Constitution, I think we talk about them, we write about them, but when it comes to practicing some of these things, we fail, we falter. The evolution of the political identity of women in India, I think this is entire, Professor Chetan, this is entire, it's a great saga by itself. Besides the great distance you covered, the spectrum you covered, I would say going beyond the constitution making, their role as social reformers, their role in doing various things also needs to be chartered and also needs to be made better known. Now, having said that, I would say, where are we today? After the partition, 47, the freedom, attainment of freedom, adoption of the Constitution with all the good things in it, equality, fraternity, justice, political, social, economic. There were great impediments to women coming forward, to joining services, to doing any kind of employment. There may be many ladies in this room of that age group who would have gone through that period of being faced with numerous odds, harassment, sometimes humiliations in their professional work when they joined service. I know the amount of prejudice which was there. Justice Mittal, I don't know, you were lucky you joined later, and perhaps you were in such a profession where people had to call you my lord, my lady, they couldn't misbehave. But in the bureaucracy in civil services, there were deep-seated prejudices. My own wife was sitting here, she joined service in the 1950s, late 1950s. There were enormous prejudices, male prejudices, where to post, what work to do. The general belief was that women are not good enough. Even the now, today, fortunately, despite all our failings and all our falterings, you look at the public services, you look at the state police, you look at the central police, you look at the judiciary, you look at the advocacy, the private sector, science, technology, engineering, banks. Women are holding the highest level posts, they're chairpersons of notable multinational corporations, they are Director General of Police, secretaries to the Government of India, what have you. They've had Chief Justices of High Courts, Chief Justices of hopefully in the Supreme Court one day. They're all over. But still there is the hesitation of calling them the weak gender has not been totally surpassed. I remember in the early 90s there was talk about when we were dealing with deficiencies in the armed forces. I was in the defense. And there had been talk from time to time for the previous earlier 5-10 years about the role of women in the armed forces. And then whenever we mooted it, it was laughed away. But in 93, I had the fortune of Shivaji Maratha, Minister of Defense, and circumstances politically were in somewhat disarray because of the economic crisis. So I drafted 3 cabinet notes under Army Act, Air Force Act, Navy Act, proposing that we induct women in the non-combat elements of the defense forces. And then Justice Mittal, all these got approved. And today you see we have rank of Vice Admiral, Lieutenant General in the armed forces. Now the Supreme Court has ruled about the right of women to be in the combat elements. So hopefully in the days to come you will see women at the highest levels, and not that the combat is a good thing, but they will get the right in being there and doing what they wish to do. So in space and atomic energy, you mention any field, you have women in very outstanding positions they hold and held in great respect. But if you look at the picture at large across the country, with 146 crores and some 76 crore women, it's a dismal picture. In the Lok Sabha and Rajya Sabha, 14%, 14.5%. You take both together is 14.5%. If you take the states, you find that if you take 31 units of states and union territories with legislatures, the average is 8%. 8% women in the legislature. If you take the panchayats, it is somewhat more encouraging. But in legislative assemblies, you have Nagaland, Mizoram, 0%. But if you see the Chhattisgarh has the highest percentage, 14.44. If you see the panchayats, it's 26 administrative units, mostly states. The representation, according to the last available data, is 26%. Uttarakhand is the highest with 56%, Chhattisgarh about 55%, but the average is 26%. Now we had this women's reservation bill at 33%. There is talk about it every now and then, but then politically the governments of the day, successive political parties, haven't had the courage, the willpower to transact this. It is necessary, it is will be productive, will be useful, and I will not say anything more except to once again compliment Dr. Gopinath and to say that we have the good fortune of listening to Professor Chetan this evening, and he will tell us many good things. But from where do we go from there? We'll have to think for ourselves. Thank you very much.
I think for us at WISCOMP, and of course I speak for everybody here, it's always a privilege and an honor to get to listen to Mr. Vora, and we're really grateful for that. Now may I request our speaker for the day, Professor Chetan, the stage is all yours.
Good evening, everyone. I know it will take me a long time to even welcome all of you, and I'm feeling so overwhelmed and privileged to have been invited to speak here on the Founding Mothers. Thank you, Vora sir and Justice Mittal. Thank you so much, Professor Gopinath, the entire WISCOMP team, and all of you are here today. I will not take much time. I have a lot of things to say, and I will either have to speak very fast or I'll have to drop a few things. So I'll choose to speak faster than I usually do. And because there was a brief introduction about who I am and what I have done, I think, and that was slightly overwhelming, I think I can indulge in speaking a bit about why did I do this work? Why did I choose to work on this? As many of you must have by now found out, I'm not a historian, I'm not a political scientist, definitely not a law person. I'm a student of literature. I read poetry, I read novels, and then I suddenly started working on the Indian Constitution. The reason perhaps was very simple. We had always been very suspicious of texts which are written by men, for men, by men, about men, or even by men about women, which is the standard thing to write. So as a feminist reader, a student of literature, I was actually not, when I started working on this, I really did not know that I will end up writing an entire book on women's role in the making of the Constitution. Part of the reason was that the existing literature did not really point any one of us into that direction. This is, I'm talking about, say, some 2 decades ago. And so I thought of the Constituent Assembly debates, which I had in my house, thanks to my old school lawyer father. And I just wanted to tease the politics of gender out of the monumental debates, to showcase it as yet another side of the operation of a gendered imagination. I wanted to prove that these debates were no different from any other patriarchal sexist text. They were conducted, that the language of the debates was inherently sexist. Their symbolism was largely an instrument of reinforcing patriarchal categories that recast asymmetric gender relations in the new mold of constitutional democracy. This was the title of a very influential text that came out in the 1980s called Recasting Women. So I thought maybe the Constituent Assembly also recast women, yet again in the form of, in the feminine form that has long been cherished. Since nearly all the members of the Assembly were male, the debates took the universalization of the male conscience for granted and framed the terms of reference in ways accessible only to lawyers and nationalists and ideologues who were indifferent to the concerns of women. Women's interests were subsumed in the interests of the nation, a practice forever to be perpetuated by the enactment of the Constitution in the name of we the people. So as a feminist reader, my task was only to read gender in these debates as a primary way of signifying relations of power. The archives were there, but the bare tip of the archives did not shake my determination. What, after all, could 15 women have done in the making of the Constitution? I found out it was not very difficult to find. I mean, even then, the Constituent Assembly debates were there, so you could see that there were 15 women, but there was no enthusiasm. I mean, anybody I spoke to said, I mean, this is what is good about 15 women being in the Constituent Assembly. This knowledge, which itself was inaccurate, as Professor Gopinath corrected in the morning, there were 17 women who were elected to the Constituent Assembly. 6 of them left for various reasons, and only 11 participated. Of these 11 also, 2 participated, joined the Constituent Assembly in the middle of its processes. But even if there were 15 women, and finding about them could hardly add anything new to our understanding of the Constitution or its history. The commentaries on the Constitution of India did not find them worth mentioning. Be it Sirwai, be it D.D. Basu, or any of the smaller volumes. The works of history that describe the transition period between 1946 and 1950 were mostly taken up with accounts of the partition, and public memory had little space for commemorating these women. The most influential work on the history of the constitution making, Granville Austin's The Indian Constitution, Cornerstone of a Nation, had a token presence of these women who were referred to, and again I'm coming to what happened now, in Victorian idioms as ladies. Austin uses the word ladies for women. It would not be completely out of place here, in this room particularly, to remember that Alladi Krishnaswamy Iyer, the great legal luminary in the Constituent Assembly, consistently referred to them as ladies. And Durga Bai remembered that for B.R. Ambedkar, women belong to 3 categories: females, women, and ladies. Of course, females constituted the large biological category, brainless. That's the categorization that Ambedkar had done of women, according to Durga Bai. Durga Bai and Ambedkar had running tips in the Constituent Assembly, to which, if I have time, I will come back. Ladies was the category of elitist women in need of paternalist attention or derogatory snide, which is why this classification was done on the first place. And women denoted those with a feminist consciousness, who were very few in number. So while a few ladies in the Constituent Assembly, a point that is made very often is a critique of the class affiliations of the women members, there were very few women in the sense Ambedkar used the word. There was, as if, a continuum of sorts, an implicit consensus in a large interpretive community that the gender composition of the Constituent Assembly made no difference to history, to constitutional law, to constitutional interpretation, or even to feminism. Now that we are in the 75th year of the Constitution, we can remember that in its 50th year, many books came out again about the Constitution of India. In the 50th year, Upendra Baxi had argued that the Constitution coolly contemplates a male-dominated society and does not see patriarchy as problematic, but perceives it as natural. It was possible for him to say that from a suffering feminist perspective, that the foundational violence against women enacted during the moment of constitution making iterates itself over and over again through 50 long years of unfoldment of its vicious patriarchal logic. This feminist perspective could develop, at least partially, because the Constitution itself was read as a document of patriarchy. Its history was a function of its current interpretation and not the other way around. The foundational violence against women was a result of the absence of women in the debates of the Constituent Assembly. This is just to foreground the idea that gender has always been present in the history of Indian Constitution, but in a form that injured rather than underlined women's memories. I want to share here something that an eminent Indian historian had once told me of Amrit Kaur, whom she claimed she had regular opportunities to see in her childhood. She was a demure, shy woman who appeared to have little ability for self-assertion and aggression. Do you think her presence would have made any difference? So this was also the idea about women. I mean, even if you discover that there were women in the Constituent Assembly, this is the kind of women they were, and what difference could they have made? This clearly shows that the gender that was always present in constitutional history, or the author of the Constitution, always had a gender, and that gender was always masculine, at least until the 50th year of the Constitution. These were men who were patriarchs, deserving of our respect, depending on who you are, or these were women, dutifully feminine, submissive, and eminently forgettable. It would perhaps not be surprising if the women members of the Constituent Assembly failed the performance test of our times. I wish I wanted to play a video of Ansa Mehta today, but I don't think we could do it. But tomorrow, maybe at the workshop, we can do. If you hear Hansa Mehta's voice, you would probably, which would also fit the description of Amrit Kaur that I just recounted, you would feel that, okay, I mean, this woman with such a feeble voice, what difference could she have made? What would perhaps surprise you would be to know that both Amrit Kaur and Hansa Mehta wrote some of the most powerful notes of dissent, pithy but very powerful, during the drafting of the Constitution. I may not get the time to talk about all of them today, so let me quickly recall 3 of them for you before I move to the next section of my lecture. So there will be 3 sections as I planned. This is the first one. Then there will be a couple of slides which I want to show you, which will be mostly random, where I will show you some pictures so that you can get an idea of what the Constitution Assembly was. And then maybe in the third section, I'll talk about what we can take away from this history. So yes, going back to the 3 quick notes of dissent and what their implications can be. The first note of dissent that Amrit Kaur and Hansa Mehta wrote in the Constituent Assembly was against making the right to free practice of religion a fundamental right. When we talk about secularism, we cannot forget the rationale behind their dissent. The second note of dissent was against making military conscription compulsory in the Constitution. When we talk about the nature of state, military or otherwise, and forced labor, liberty of choice, and non-violence and constitutional morality, we need to remember this particular note of dissent. And the third note of dissent, Mr. Vora was talking about the relation between rights, was a dissent against classification of rights as enforceable and non-enforceable. So the distinction between fundamental rights and directive principles. They asked that there should be rights which should be enforced, and rights should be all rights should be equally fundamental. Throughout their interventions, the women members argued for enforceability. Now, all these dissents are in written form and submitted between March and April 1947. Something we need to remember. This is before the independence. This is before the setting of the drafting committee. These notes of dissent were marked with signatures of individual women. I'll show some signatures today. Written at this early foundational stage of the framing, they were meant to register the erasing march of the collective oral debates. It is very important to remember that the Constituent Assembly debates are transcriptions of oral spoken debates, which again, if one goes deeper into the history, were debates that which were also written and then delivered on the floor of the Constituent Assembly. Normatively, they were written expressions of the consistency of women's moral position that often stood at variance with the dominant attitude of the Assembly. They added individuality to the impersonality of the collective authorship of the Constitution. These notes of dissent were marked with signatures, and they were meant to show that we exist in history. So as early as 1947, February, March, the archives were being made, and we have yet forgotten them. For my narrative, I choose a different word as the antonym for dissent. Usually, when I ask my students, they would say the antonym for dissent would be consent. But the antonym that I choose here is not consent, but will. Not a response, not an acquiescence, not agreeing to something passively without enthusiasm, but the will. A thoughtful, premeditated, strategically presented, long-harbored desire, both personal and political. It is this will that is expressed in the 3 words of the Constitution that Professor Gopinath spoke about: adopt, enact, and give to ourselves this Constitution. What did it mean for women to adopt the Constitution? Did it mean they embraced constitutional values, liberty, equality, and fraternity, as shaped by more powerful, mostly male historical figures? Did they merely adopt a constitution framed by others? Or did they infuse their own versions of secularism, socialism, citizenship, and justice, as well as concepts of nation and state in the making of this constitution? So I consider this entire act as a self-gift. This is where I move to the second section of the presentation. I'm sure you have already read Durga Bai's speech, which is on the screen, and you can see that this will of women to make the Constitution of India was formed, at least if you try to calculate the date, Durgabai is talking in 1950 about her own childhood. So it must be sometime in 1920s that Durgabai Deshmukh is thinking of drafting the Constitution of India. So this is not the political self, as Mr. Vora was talking about, of women, was already in the making, and in the making to an extent that a young girl in what is now Andhra would imagine that at some point I should be able to draft or be a participant in the making of the Constitution of India. So this is the story now that I'll tell you with a few slides. I'm trying to be, as I said, as fast as I can. So not explaining this slide. Here is something which I deliberately choose because this is the seal of the Constituent Assembly. There are two colors. The point here is to remember that the Indian women's movement or the constitutional thought in India did not always know that there will be an India and a Pakistan on 15th of August 1947. The Constituent Assembly, when it was initially conceived of, it did not even know whether this will be a constitution only for India or for both. Women had a very special position. They had registered this idea of partition for very long, until very late, even inside the Constituent Assembly. So these are the women. For those of you who would want to, I'll just give you a very brief, maybe biographical details of all these women, so that it refreshes our memory, and that would also be, I think, a good tribute to all of them. Standing from behind, you can see from the left, there is Kamla Chaudhary. Kamla Chaudhary is a feminist storyteller, is a feminist fiction writer of the 1930s and 40s. She was already well published, and her stories were recognized for their special sensitivity to women's issues and what is called the lived experiences of women. To her right is Sucheta Kripalani. Many of you would know her, and again there are various numbers people say, so she is the first female chief minister in India. She was also at that point, and this is something that I am saying here because I'll not get a chance to talk about it, she was also a member of the AIWC, once its vice president. At that point her husband Acharya J.B. Kripalani was the president of the Indian National Congress, and in the fierce debate on the Hindu Code Bill that took place in the Constituent Assembly, there was a kind of indirect tiff between wife and husband. These are things that we need to remember. In the middle is Durgabai, G. Durgabai, not Durgabai Deshmukh then, a woman of extraordinary brilliance, the only lawyer among this set of 11 women. And the reason why I cited Ambedkar and why Ambedkar might have made that remark was because it was in her capacity as the secretary of the steering committee and also in the rules committee. It was Durgabai's task to present all the amendments to the Constituent Assembly before the Constituent Assembly. So Durgabai had this very interesting role, and also she was privy to information. She could know what amendment is to be placed. She could know the process through which the Constituent Assembly is going to make its decisions. She would advise her female colleagues as to wait and watch when a particular clause is to be brought, when a particular draft will be debated, and so on. So she was very helpful in that regard. When she came to the Constituent Assembly, she was stopped. Her friends in the Madras High Court, they said, why are you going to waste your time? You should stay in Madras. She was one of the most promising lawyers at Madras at that point. It is also important to remember that Durgabai was not allowed to study law at the Banaras Hindu University because they said that this is not a subject for women to study. And so she had to finally study law at Madras. She couldn't come to BHU. She got an admission to one of the inns in London, but because of the Second World War, she couldn't go. Durgabai also, these are things which I remember because these will be connected later. Durgabai also went to the jail for the first time when she was a young girl, and she discovered that women are never represented, and that is why many innocent women are suffering in Indian prisons. So what we need to do is to have more female lawyers. So that was one of her inspirations why she chose to become a lawyer. Another interesting thing about Durgabai, which may help us foreground the whole debate, is she was married as a child, and there was no divorce then, so she separated from her husband, and she told her husband that you are free to go and choose and marry anybody you want to, and if that woman is ever in trouble, please call me up. I will try to help her. And that is exactly what she did. To her left is Begum Izaz Rasool. About her, something has already been mentioned. She was at the forefront of Indian sports. I want to share one interesting anecdote here. I went to Lucknow in 2007 to do some research on Qudsi Izaz Rasool, and I was directed to some people who had known her in her prime days, and most of these men, all they wanted to tell me when I told them that she was a member of the Constituent Assembly and I want to know more about her. I was not a historian, so I didn't know how to approach these things, and all I was told were stories about her various affairs. This is how public memory had recorded these people. To her left is Purnima Banerjee. Again, about Qudsi Izaz Rasool, I think one important thing, because you were talking about armed forces. In the Constituent Assembly legislative debates, she made a special amendment. She proposed an amendment against the Armed Forces Special Powers Bill. So it was the first time, I think, the resistance to AFSPA came. It came from one of the women members of the Constituent Assembly. To her left is Purnima Banerjee. She was a socialist leader. She has not been remembered in the best terms. Unfortunately, she passed away very soon after the making of the Constitution in 1951 or 52. And to her left, as many of you may have noticed having stared at this picture for some time, is this woman who looks a little out of place here. I mean, not draped in a colorful sari, not standing also in a somewhat little odd manner, and that is Dakshayani Velayudhan, the youngest and also the only Dalit female member of the Constituent Assembly. So in this entire cohort, she is probably somehow different from the rest. My friend Vinay is here, who has, and I've been asked this question many times, what was the relation between all these women and the Dalit women in the Constituent Assembly? I think I have always argued that they collaborated and they tried to bring intersectional, overlapping convergences together in the making of the Constitution. Vinay has hunted a document, has found an archival evidence for that, a letter that Dakshayani has written when she got elected to the Constituent Assembly after a lot of resistance. So men from the Dalit community opposed her election to the Constituent Assembly because she had taken positions against the Scheduled Caste Federation of India, against Ambedkar, and she contested the election to the Constituent Assembly against N. Shivaraj, who was the right-hand man of B.R. Ambedkar. And she won by a margin of 2-3 votes after a recount. The Congress, male members from the Congress opposed her election because she was vitriolic in her criticism of C. Rajagopalachari and sometimes even Vallabhbhai Patel. So that was Dakshayani Velayudhan. And but the first thing that she said when she got elected to the Constituent Assembly was that I want to, and I'm looking forward to, working with my female colleagues in the Constituent Assembly. So something that immediately gives me goosebumps even now. Again, sitting from the left is Renuka Ray, as you can see, smiling. Renuka Ray was a graduate from the London School of Economics, a favorite student of Harold Lasky. Her mother was a founding mother of the All India Women's Conference. She was the only woman who was elected to the Central Legislative Assembly from among these. She had an experience of parliamentary politics. She had worked very closely with B.N. Rao on the Hindu Code Bill through the 1940s. And she has several accounts of how she had to learn things. I think it is also important here for us to remember that these are the 11 women that we are seeing here. But behind each of these women, there was a big set of other women who were also their collaborators. I can name here one name that immediately comes to my mind is Kitty Shiva Rao, who was a very close friend of the IWC, and Kitty Shiva Rao and Renuka Ray together wrote a lot of amendments and a lot of petitions about the Hindu Code Bill. Then is Hansa Mehta, of course, very, very well known now. Hansa Mehta was, I remember a lot of things about her, but suddenly I remember, I don't know why, she was a great translator. She would translate French poetry into Gujarati and Sanskrit into English and so on. She wrote for children. She was, of course, as you know, she was one of the only. She was the first Vice Chancellor of the MS University, Baroda. I mean, Srinivas writes about how he was handpicked as a prodigy, and she gave him all kinds of liberty, and is very, very grateful in his memoirs to Hansa Mehta's help to him. Hansa Mehta was also on this subcommission on women initially, and then on the Commission on Human Rights that drafted the UDHR. Renuka Ray was part of the United Nations Commission on the Right to Information. Amrit Kaur, who is sitting next to Hansa Mehta, was one of the founders of the UNESCO, United Nations Education, Social and Cultural Organization. Amrit Kaur was the one of the founding mothers of the AIWC. As you can see, Amrit Kaur, we have already talked about Amrit Kaur, spoke very little. If you look at the Constituent Assembly debates, you will hardly ever find Amrit Kaur speaking there. There is not a single time that she rose and she spoke in the Constituent Assembly. But she had made tremendous impact on the making of the Constitution. Ashok Gopal's recent biography of Ambedkar also suggests that she was one of the kind of negotiators between Nehru and Ambedkar while there were conflicts in the Constituent Assembly. In my own research, I found that she was one of the key negotiators between the Madras camp and the Hindiwalas during the debate on the language question in the Constituent Assembly. She was very close to Gandhi, she was very close to Nehru, and she had a huge impact on the younger colleagues that she had here. To her left is Annie Mascarene from Travancore and Cochin, who joined the Constituent Assembly a little later. And to her left is Ammu Swaminathan, about whom I will probably not be able to say more because I'm trying to rush through time. So this is the picture. I'm sure you will strain your eyes, but you will not be able to find more than 2 or 3 women in this huge crowd. These are the signatures of the women in the Constituent Assembly. If you look, I could use the pointer, but I leave it for your exercise. You can see G. Durgabai's signature is on the here. On the right side, from left, second on the left column from bottom, you can see this is very close to Ambedkar. This is just, I think, to refresh your memories. What do we do with these signatures? Why don't we remember them? This is not a question which we have asked very seriously, because these are not women who were forgettable. These are not women who were minorities in any sense of the term, at least when the during the Indian freedom struggle or nationalist movement or women's movement. There are 4 reasons which I identify. One is, of course, that there is a division of labor between political scientists who work 1950 onwards, historians who stop at 1947, or a lot of energy is given to the partition, legal and constitutional scholars who write commentaries but do not look into the original intentions of the Constituent Assembly members, apart from a few lip services. And the final reason, which I think need to be thought about very seriously, Upendra Baksi's comment is one example. I'm not citing other feminist scholars on this, but there was a kind of feminist disenchantment with the Indian Constitution for quite some time, which did not probably allow them to look into what women could have done in the Constituent Assembly. The other reasons are more obvious. There is a moral authority of the founding fathers. You can see Nehru, even in 1950, is claiming that this house has a moral authority because we have framed this constitution. When he's saying we, I don't think he's remembering the women members of the Constituent Assembly. There was a debate between Nehru and Renuka Ray on the right to property, and Renuka Ray did not agree with him, and she wrote a note of dissent in the party meetings, and Nehru stopped talking to her for 6 months. So it's you can understand that the founding fathers' narrative is entrenched in the making of the Constitution right from the very beginning. The other is the burden that we lay on the founding fathers. I feel pity for the founding fathers sometimes, because you lay everything that is wrong about the Constitution, you say that this is the founding fathers. That also is probably not the best way to look at it. The founding fathers, they are geniuses. The way this is Shankar's cartoon from 1949. And then there is, of course, a question, is there a founding moment? I wish I could read this whole thing. This is from the Objectives Resolution of 1946, 13th of December. Just I've highlighted or the words in bold which tell us how although they said that this is a very radical constitution, now we use the word transformative constitution. Do we really have a founding moment? You look at the way Nehru is treating the Indian constitution on the moment. He says he talks about a new age. He talks about the very dawn of that history, which might be considered almost the dawn of human history till today. He's almost speaking in the language that our parliamentarians use now. And he talks about how the past crowd oppresses him. Am I worthy of that past? You know, the kind of first person singular narrative of a founding father. The greater future, I hope, and again this mighty past and the mightier future. There is very little in the in Nehru's speech where he talks about a break from the past. I mean, in the course of probably today or maybe tomorrow, there will be many occasions where we'll read speeches by women and Ambedkar who talk regularly about breaking from the past, which is not something that other members of the Constituent Assembly are talking about. And the last term I find very interesting when he says that we are laboring to usher in the new. So there is a kind of a pain of, there's a lot of labor pain that this founding father has in giving birth to the Republic. I want all of you, because these are the two images, you see, this is Nehru speaking in the Constituent Assembly, 15th August 1947, and you have Hansa Mehta speaking on the same from the same platform. This is very important. I'm just reading this out so that it helps us imagine what these women did in the Constituent Assembly. This is a parliament of men. Think of the library hall of the Parliament building, which hosted more than 300 members, dozens of secretarial staff, reporters, and other members of the Indian and foreign press, general visitors and guests, while the debates were taking place. Think of the grand architecture of this space, with its 13 arc-shaped rows clasped on each other in circles of elevated wooden benches, facing an enclosed dais with an imperial elevation on which is seated the chairman, a widely respected patriarch of conservative sympathies. This is Dr. Rajendra Prasad. On either side of his dais, Dr. Rajendra Prasad did not want to meet Renukare. He had almost kind of given a veto that if you pass the Hindu Code Bill, I will resign from the Constituent Assembly. And Renukare wanted to get an audience from him, and he was refusing. And then finally she said that my father was your professor at Presidency College. And that is when he allowed and he listened to Renukare. So this is the structure. This is the patriarchal, sexist, masculinist, call it whatever you want, structure of the Constituent Assembly. On either side of this dais, below him are seated seasoned bureaucrats providing secretarial assistance to the members, and these seasoned bureaucrats are ICS officers, providing secretarial assistance to the members, among whom are ministers of the first cabinet of independent India. Of them, only one is a woman, that is Amrit Kaur. At the center of the hall, an enormous candelabrum is suspended from the 80-foot-high dome. For a woman member, one of the backbenchers of this house, to speak is to walk on the green carpet up to the front and mount the rostrum, which has one of the two microphones in the hall, the other reserved for the chairman, and speak to a crowd of argumentative men, literally taking the floor amid the sound of 40 fans, and in prolonged Delhi winters, that of several heaters. So this is the context in which women members had to speak and perform. This is not the parliament where you have a microphone attached to your desk and you can stand up and speak. Walk all the way from there, come and speak, and you know what kind of masculinist society we have, the male gaze following you throughout. So this is, why can't we remember, I think this is a very heroic thing to do. I think here this is the image that gives you the idea of what I meant when I said that one of them is the picture that you see in the below is the picture of the first cabinet. That is why Dr. Ambedkar is sitting here and Rajkumari Amrit Kaur is also sitting there. So this is an overlap between the Indian state, the Indian government. This is the overlap between the Indian legislature. This is also the Constituent Assembly, which is working like the Provisional Parliament of India. And this is also the same body which is drafting the Constitution of India. Do we call them the mothers of the Indian Republic? I want to take 1 minute as to what I mean or why I use the word mothers for them. The reason why I use the word mothers for them is, of course, primarily to counter the trope of founding fathers. Of course, a nation doesn't need a father or a mother. Republics are not given birth to by fathers and mothers. But the idea is also to see them as a collective, not thinking of them as independent individual women, but as collective, as women who came together with a particular vision. What was that vision? I call it deliberately a feminist vision, a feminist moral imagination. These are two images just to give an idea that from 1930s onwards, no matter what they themselves said about themselves, what was their self-description, these women were recognized as feminists, both by the Indian press and by the press abroad. So you can see when Renuka Ray arrives in Chicago, the newspaper writes that India Feminist Campaign related by City's Guest, and she's described as a feminist from India. When Hansa Mehta is elected to the All India Women's Conference, is the president of All India Women's Conference, it's a major news, and she's described as both nationalist and feminist. What is so feminist about these, their constitutional, about their moral imagination? I think I will very, very quickly run through this, maybe not read the entire thing. It is important to remember that between 1926 and 1946, before the Constituent Assembly was convened, there was a very strong women's movement in India, which followed or which adopted a mode of constitutional politics, in which they wrote a lot of petitions through where they negotiated a lot with both the colonial state and the nationalist movement. And they spoke in terms of the available constitutional jurisprudence. The other aspect of this constitutional politics is that this was more or less a kind of a collaboration. This also is one of the, I think, special features about of the Indian feminist movement pre-independence, that it was, and it is something that they kept on talking about, that we are not feminists because the association was that as feminists you would be anti-men. But Indian feminist movement, at least in this decade, was self-consciously collaborative, and they would rope in a number of men for advancing their arguments. So if you find this is something that, again, as I think historical interpretation needs to keep in mind, that if you do not find a woman's voice in the Constituent Assembly debates, that does not mean that a woman is not speaking. Sometimes there is a man speaking on behalf of that woman. And that is the collaboration that they had effectively created through a kind of strategy of 20 years of constitutional politics. So you would see many of these important male leaders writing on behalf of women, signing their petitions, and so on. So I have chosen these two images because these are the two key draftspersons of the Indian Constitution, B.N. Rao and B.R. Ambedkar. I've already talked about how B.N. Rao collaborated with women, and we can see many, many examples of Ambedkar's collaboration with these women. The other important aspect is that they all believed in written forms of argument. The moment they discovered that we are only 11 in number, they knew that our only strength will be if we can write a lot rather than speak so much. And they believed in a kind of a written form of justice. This is from the Constituent Assembly debates. Durgabai says that if we do not have a code, then we don't have justice. To be without a code is to be without justice. Some of these important texts before the drafting of the Constitution, I will come to this part after this, I will examine all of them very briefly, but just for your information, these are some of the important documents, very, very important documents, which should definitely be considered as part of the constitutional antecedents of antecedents of the Indian Constitution. You can see the legal disabilities of women, many, many reports prepared by the All India Women's Conference. The All India Women's Conference had a legislative program. It is very important to remember, this is very important because the AIWC and many other women's organizations would regularly prepare their own legislative programs, meaning a set of demands from the legislators. And when people would contest elections, they would say, if you agree with this, then only we will vote for you. If you don't agree with this, we will not vote for you. So this is a kind of coming of age. This is a kind of a, presenting women as a constituency. This was happening as early as in 1937, 38. The very important document of the National Planning Committee called Women's Role in Planned Economy, the many, many documents of the Hindu Law Committee, hundreds of documents that were written to the international women's organizations, international labor organizations, all the various organizations associated with the United Nations, and finally the Women's Charter of Rights and Duties, to which I will probably come later. And there are important texts that women wrote or women were part of after the drafting of the Constitution. It is important for us to connect these two kinds of texts, pre-Constitution and post-Constitution, and see how the feminist arguments that they had made before making of the Constitution find a kind of a constitutional validation, constitutional legitimacy in these later texts. Some of them I will talk about maybe after this PPT is done. I think Encyclopedia of Social Work, edited by Durgabai Deshmukh, needs to be given a very, very important position here. It's a 3-volume encyclopedia which has almost every single topic that we discuss in social transformation in this country now, all of them written both from a constitutional and a feminist perspective. And she had commissioned articles by important jurists, important legal thinkers, important professors, activists, and so on. Some of the important things about this moral imagination would be, I think I am running short of time, 10 minutes, so yes. The most important one that I would want to, just the first one, is that women had already presented themselves as an imagined enumerated community. As I think before 1947, all you have to do is to look at the WRPE and some of the status of women in India reports that were prepared by the organizations. One of them was prepared by Kamala Devi Chattopadhyay for the Asian Relations Conference in 1947. The data, the census figures, the kind of social indices of women's status, actually what it was like, right, in great rigorous academic details presented, and then to argue that this is the actual status of women, this is the number of women, this is the proportion of women. One of the arguments they made is like the literacy level of women in the Constituent Assembly in India. So this is the group, and this is a minority, and this is minority because your society has not taken sufficient care, has not paid enough attention to us, and we need constitutional protection. So I'll just maybe stop here. This is the now famous Indian Women's Charter of Rights and Duties that was prepared by the AIWC in December 1945. It was circulated to all the important legislatures in this country, to international women's organizations and the United Nations Commission on Human Rights. It had made all kinds of demands, including the recognition of the right of a housewife, recognition of the labor of the housewife in home. And this was not just in 1945. The earliest example, the earliest instance of this can be found in 1931, when Indian women's movement was demanding that the housewives, the economic value of the labor that women do in houses must be recognized. This is a cartoon from again the 1940s, 49. I deliberately choose this here once again because it shows this is about the Hindu law code. But the idea of this cartoon is that women are the Hindu code bill is like a young daughter, is like a female child, and that needs to be who needs to be steered clear of, protected from the various attacks that are coming, and Dr. Ambedkar is protecting them and taking away. I take this, I mean, historically this is not completely inaccurate. There is a point in this cartoon, but what this cartoon misses out on is the fact that the Hindu code bill is not something that is only drafted by the male members. We'll come to this maybe in the next section of my talk. I have 5 minutes, ma'am, so yeah. Thank you. Yeah, so this is maybe I will leave you with the same image, or I think, no, I don't know what's, okay, fine, so maybe this is good enough. Now, what do we make of this entire historical document? I have a few things which I think we need to remember. The first thing that we remember is that the Constituent Assembly is a very gerontocratic, patriarchal space. We need to remember that, and I believe I have been able to invite all of you to enter the Constituent Assembly like a woman, not like a man, which is what historians have always done. Followed by a male gaze operating in a gendered site, showing the woman into an object of ridicule, or sometimes admiration. Neither of them is, I think, very good. Often circumscribing her expressions by unwritten codes of performative expectations. Also, by designating her arguments as debates, the official archives have erased the spectacular and non-verbal aspects of a woman's presence at the founding moment. I will give two examples from another set of debates which the Constituent Assembly conducted, and I think historians need to go back to those debates when the Constituent Assembly was performing the role of a parliament. There are two important, I hope you'll forgive me for this fidgeting. Yeah. So there are two of these arguments which I am trying to, which I will just leave with you. The first is the debate on the Hindu Code Bill. I think it's very important to remember that the Hindu Code Bill had broken the imagined continuum between the ideal nation and the ideal Hindu family, which is what the dominant ideological trope of the Constituent Assembly believed in. And it, because of the debates on the Hindu Code Bill broke the imagined continuum because the spectre of an alternative imagination of mothers who could adopt a child of their choice, daughters who could inherit their father's property, and wives who could divorce their husbands. This image of the woman continuously kept haunting the Constituent Assembly. And there are many debates which you can probably read tomorrow during the workshop, or we can see how the idea of this kind of a woman sitting in the Constituent Assembly, disrupting or rather contaminating the purity and the sanctity of the Constituent Assembly debates, had a kind of a haunting effect on many of the arguments of the male members in the Constituent Assembly. Among them, I would recommend all of you to read this brilliant speech by Pattabhi Sitaramaiah, who argues that the child marriage is the best thing that Indian culture has. Who says that it is our nation's great misfortune that Dr. B.R. Ambedkar is drafting the Constitution of India, and the way women members snub him in the Constituent Assembly. This is something that the written Constituent Assembly debates can never, give an idea of, unless you try to imagine this within the full context of what is happening here. The other debate with which I will end today is also very important, because maybe I will read this out, ma'am, give me 2 extra minutes. I'm speaking for women, or speaking as a woman maybe. This is the legislative session in which the Abducted Persons Recovery and Restoration Bill was discussed. The bill sought to provide for mechanisms to recover women abducted during the partition violence and return them to their homes. Like the Hindu Code Bill debate, here too the dominant trope of the debates presumed a seamless continuum between the Hindu home and the Hindu nation, the Muslim home and the Muslim nation, and treated the woman as a site for a contest of honor between two nations. But this is, mind you, the dominant debate. It was not easy to, and there's a lot of partition violence. We are very close to, we can probably today, we can imagine what it was for women to argue on the lines on which they argued on those particular occasions. It was not easy to challenge these equations between community and gender in times of such vitriolic and agitated arguments. And yet there were members, mostly women, I must say there were the men also, who inserted notions of affective bonds and possibilities of intercommunal matrimony during these debates, evoking the mutual attachment that might have developed between couples from two communities. Purnima Banerjee, for instance, argued that such girls should not be sent back to countries to which they originally belonged merely because they happened to be Hindus or Muslims. Another woman, member G. Durgabai, raised the question of the consent of the abducted woman, and while making it a compulsory condition for her recovery, also argued that it is nearly impossible to ascertain what is happening in the mind of a traumatized woman. You'd be surprised to know that Durgabai Renuka Ray demanded that we should have mental health care facilities for refugee women in India. Right? They were demanding it in 1949. They were asking for psychiatric treatment for women who are in refugee camps and saying that they should not be brought from wherever they are. This is not the place for a detailed analysis of these debates, but they clearly mark a refusal to derive the sovereignty of the nation on assumed ethnic and communal identities. In the constitutional history of India, these debates could also be read as a site of the affective turn in the Consent Assembly that invites us to look at the complex question of the consent of women. That is how I foregrounded my talk, that the Constitution of India was not drafted by the consent of women, but by the will of women. And women, because we talk a lot about violence, sexual violence, particularly when we talk about the question of consent, these women were aware that we are not here to give our consent so easily. We have a will and we have to give it back to this nation. There are a few things which I am not reading, but there is a concluding sentence which I would like to read. To end this discussion. The central assumption behind this entire investigation for me is that the Constitution is a site of dialogue between 2 or 3 or more generations. The more important assumption is that the Constitution can be a site of dialogue between different generations of feminists. And this dialogue becomes possible due to an ethical imagination embedded in the very history of the Constitution of India. Key terms of this engagement will have to be discovered, maybe rediscovered, and they cannot be limited only to the standard terms like secularism, democracy, equality, and others, but affect also, as I mentioned now. For the contemporary Indian feminist, or anybody who is interested in women's rights in this country at this moment, this recovery of the women's voice at the site of the making of the Constitution will initiate an inquiry into feminism's historical investment in constitutionalism. For anybody who is suspicious regarding the universal values of this constitutionalism, an imaginary echo from a woman member of the Consent Assembly, you can have Kamala Devi Chattopadhyay here. Towards the end of her life, Kamala Devi used to regret a lot that the current generation of women do not understand, do not appreciate the kind of struggles that we had gone through. Or Izaz Rasool could have said the same thing, because she had consistently been referred to as a kind of a traitor by her community. Or Durgabai herself, because she was also continuously referred to as somebody who was a conservative reformist. So any of these women would have probably answered, if they were here in this meeting today, in these words. We had to go through a lot of experience, examine historically constituted experience of women from a diverse range of communities, a painful process, but a necessary condition for discovering the transcendental universal principles of justice that you find in the Indian Constitution. We may have made a few mistakes here and there, but it was this discovery that we wanted to convey to the Consent Assembly. If the current generation thinks that our inferences were wrong, it can prove so, but only after walking through the same experiences. We did not give consent to the Constitution, but we willed it. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. I'm really at a loss of words to, I think, describe the journey you took us through. And what a beautiful way to leave at the question of will in drafting the Constitution. I won't take much time, but may I now request Justice Mittal to kindly share her reflections on this.
Mr. N.N. Bora, Mr. Dr. Achyut Chetan, Dr. Meenakshi Gopinath, Professor Rajkumar, Mrs. Usha Bora, so many friends that I see in the audience. I see Dr. Babli Moitra, former principal of the Indraprasth College, I see Vandana Kohli. I see Vasvi Bharatram is here. And so many colleagues and friends from OP Jindal. Ladies and gentlemen, I can truly say that I am at a loss for words. At the end of such a brilliant discourse, and such a brilliant analysis, I could also say I wish you were a lawyer in my room, in my courtroom. I'm truly grateful to WISCOMP for giving me this opportunity, not to speak here, but for me to delve into this topic. I had never ever read the Constituent Assembly, the members of the Constituent Assembly, or the contribution by the members in these terms. And it was an eye-opener, and I'm truly gratified. And I have already booked 2 copies of the book, which I'm going to share with the library in the Delhi High Court, which I think, and apprise judges also, and hopefully hold a few more discourses to which I hope I will be able to invite you. Time is short. I was given 10 minutes, but I think to be the last speaker at the end of a long day, just a few words about what Chetan has said, Achyut Chetan has said, and then I'll just share with you a few courtroom experiences to tell you what the way forward can be from what the founding mothers had visualized, had actually fought for, and where we are today, where we need to take it today. So today, as we stand at the crossroads of reflection and reformation, it is both a privilege and responsibility to honor a legacy completely overlooked. The legacy of the 15 remarkable women who were part of the Constituent Assembly of India. Their number may have been small. They tantamount to only 5% of the total members of the Constituent Assembly, but their voices resonated powerfully through the chambers of our nation's foundational moment. I'm reminded of a training that I did with the Delhi judges from the first question which was posed by Achyut as to why are they invisible. In trainings that I did in sensitizing judges in sexual violence, they had 2 sessions on which are labeled as voices from the margins, and 1 session included members of the LGBT community. Lakshmi is a transgender activist, and those of you who don't know her, she's only 6 feet 3 inches. She has hair up to her waist. She dresses flamboyantly in red, gold, black, wears dangling earrings. Brazenly in a room full of judges in a very formal setting will call me, "Darling Geeta, how are you?" So that's Lakshmi. Now this beautiful transgender will stand in this room of judges, and the question she posed to them is, am I invisible? Now this is 21st century. I'm talking of the years between 2018 to 2020. Am I invisible? There's pin drop silence. Everybody thinks Lakshmi is nuts. She repeats the question. Then she says, "Can't you hear me?" Then comes a loud roar. "Of course we can." She repeats the question. "Am I invisible?" Then comes back a loud roar. "Of course not." What Lakshmi said is engraved on my mind and my heart till date. She says, "Then why do you treat me so?" And from Lakshmi I learnt was that transgenders, despite a judgment in a PIL by the Supreme Court, the NALSA judgment, where the rights of their transgenders were recognized, till date you won't see transgenders in your schools. You won't find them in any jobs. There are no lawyer transgenders. There are no judge transgenders. You won't even see them in restaurants, in shops, in any public space. And Lakshmi told me that in northern India you have the system of badhai. You go to, when somebody has a son or a housewarming, you go, you dance and you get some money. In rest of the country, other than sex trade or begging, they have no occupational jobs even. Now this is a plight of transgenders. This was an aside, I've forgotten myself. But to connect it to what we are looking at today, why we don't see the women in the Constituent Assembly? Because we treat them as invisible. Women, it is the sheer tokenism of the appointments, of the assignments which Mr. Vora spoke about. It's the same practice. You are very good for hospitality duties in the courtroom. Nobody will look at women, well, by and large. Today, you have no choice. But there are many, many high courts where you have never seen a woman judge. You will get rosters for family court, family cases, child custody matters. So that is the reason why we haven't heard of, we haven't spoken about. And despite my being in a legal position, have not applied my mind to the role and application that women did, the contribution made by them. Now, amongst the major contributions that Achyut has highlighted, you look at what these women spoke about. You have fundamental rights advocated by Amu Swaminathan, Begum Aisal Rasool. She spoke vigorously on the importance of having a constitutional remedy. You get a right of appeal for breach of fundamental right to the Supreme Court of India. Very few constitutions in the world have this. Durgabai Deshmukh on fundamental rights. Uniform Civil Code. You see the strong advocacy today. Who spoke about it? Rajkumari Amrit Kaur, Hansa Mehta, Durgabai Deshmukh. Hindu Code Bill. Renuka Deshre, Durgabai Deshmukh, Amu Swaminathan, who spoke about reforms in Hindu religious laws. Against reservation, let me just quote a few words that they said. Against reservation, Begum Aizaz Rasool, this is what she said. She was the only Muslim on the committee. Reservation is a self-destructive weapon which separates the minority from the majority for all times. It's such a true statement made when 75 years thereafter we are actually experiencing it. Dakshyani Velayadun called untouchability a sin against humanity. In 2014 to 2015, 2025, we are talking of manual scavenging. We are talking of toilets, building toilets, It's a very welcome step. You are hearing these kind of conversations, these kind of recognition of these rights. But who began these conversations? They began between 1946 to 1950. Independence of the judiciary I have also already mentioned. Then you have use Hindustani, not Hindi, was advocated by Durgabai Deshmukh. She said not the Sanskritized Hindi. Respect linguistic diversity. It is so badly needed. I have done a case of a rape victim, of a 8-year-old Tamil rape victim whose statements were recorded by 3 people in Delhi. The police officer recorded it as Buri Harkate. The magistrate who recorded a statement during investigation as Galat Kam. And the trial judge has something equally innocuous. 3 things came out from this. A Tamil child, we don't know whether she even spoke Hindi. And Buri Harkate is not an expression which a child will use, So, you need to respect linguistic diversity, introduce procedures in your proceedings, and ensure that you're able to ensure equality and equality in the process and fair access to justice. But this was all visualized by the constituent mothers. So one important matter which has barely been mentioned was with regard to the right to property as a fundamental right. Renuka Ray and Purnima Banerjee opposed this vigorously. They were overridden, and right to fundamental right came on the constitution in 1950. Their opposition was not heeded. But what results? In 1978, we have a constitutional amendment to remove right of property as a fundamental right. So these women did not merely participate. They led, they shaped, they transformed. They ensured that gender and class inequalities were addressed. Their push for minority protection has been instrumental in shaping India's inclusive democracy and a socially just India. But as Granville Austin, everybody has mentioned him, so aptly argued, the Constitution is a social document. It is not static. It is an organic instrument, one that must evolve with needs of society. Continued engagement with Constitution is not a luxury. It is essential. If we are to broaden the political agency of women and others historically left out of power, we must confront the vacuums and the loopholes which still persist. Please remember, perhaps it is for this reason that justice, fraternity, equality, they are not defined either by the Constitution or by any legal statute. They constantly evolve. And this is the reason that the Supreme Court of India has been able to incorporate right to life to mean decent living, incorporate environmental protections, right to education has been recognized as a fundamental right. But these are expressions which are not defined. So what is just to one person will be hopelessly unjust to the person who's lost the case. So, and the connotations will be different. And to ensure a fair society, we have to meaningfully incorporate certain provisions. But I have seen the whole evening we have referred to gender. The Constitution does not refer to gender. Or whenever there's a reference to the expression sex. And we generally perceive gender as only a binary between male and female. We don't think of the third gender. This is a huge vacuum. This has been addressed in the South African Constitution, where the Constituent Assembly largely consisted of women. And there you find the expression, it goes beyond sex to include gender identity as well as sexual orientation. But we are still laboring, we are a far cry from that. But gender is certainly an expression which the Constitution needs to incorporate. Uniform Civil Code is another area. Caste-based reservations must incorporate. Reservation, Article 15, yes, but with economic criteria the time has come when we must look at that as to ensure fairer representation across social groups. Environmental justice no more can be one of the directive principles of state policy. It is extremely imperative, it's the call of the universe, that it needs constitutional protection. Language diversity has to be safeguarded, respecting India's rich linguistic tapestry. Then informal workers who form the backbone of the economy deserve constitutional protection. And there are constitutions which enable that. The Constitution of Brazil gives this protection to the informal labor force. Then anti-discrimination provisions, they have to be expanded in the Constitution to criminalize caste violence, hate speech. Rights without remedies are rights in name only. There are several other gaps in the statutes. For instance, genocide is not an offense. Whereas if you know about the Rwanda trials, where again it was a woman who who presided over the bench, Navanitam Pillai, a judge of the South African, from South Africa. She wrote, use of rape as a weapon to silence the voice of a complete community is genocide, But we do not have these provisions, and we need to look at these in a big way. So these reforms are not just legal necessities, these are moral imperatives, and these have been noticed by the founding mothers. They are entirely in the spirit of the women who helped create our Constitution. The journey they started was a bold and visionary one. It is now our prerogative and our duty to make our Constitution more inclusive, more just, more aligned with the aspirations of a rapidly evolving society. Let us remember, justice is not a destination, it is a constant pursuit. I would like to close with what Achyut has said. This is a quotation with regard to the participation of the founding mothers in the Constituent Assembly. And Achyut has written, women's participation in the Constituent Assembly is an exemplary sight of collaboration among women who came from different backgrounds and yet converged in their politics to introduce unquote, a unique, I think it's a unique expression, and back to the quotation, they converged in their politics to introduce a feminist moral imagination in the Constitution of India. Achyut further says, in the course of the debates, they frequently presented community affiliations as impediments to the idea of constitutional justice. So, friends, this has been a absolutely wonderful learning experience. It has been extremely humbling, actually, when you see the level at which these women have participated and contributed and, fought against the barriers, And there were many of them continue to exist. And thank you, WISCOMP, thank you, Meenakshi ji, for giving me this opportunity to be part of this wonderful journey today evening, which I hope I'll continue with Achyut. Good night.
Thank you so much for this, especially the powerful quote that justice is not just a destination but a pursuit. I think it is truly our responsibility, and it just brings me to where we began with the workshop. I think for us the question was not just to go through this journey of the contributions of the women, but to also think about what next. How do we really adopt, enact, and give to ourselves the Constitution today? How do we learn from the best practices? How do we learn from the debates and the questions they had raised in those times? And what does that tell us in today's context when we think about questions of citizenship, questions of personal and property laws, questions of secularism, and of course the question of fraternity and coexistence in the Indian context. I'm truly, truly indebted to all our speakers today. Thank you so much, Vora sir. Thank you so much, Justice Mittal. Thank you so much, Professor Chetan. I'm sure there are a lot of questions, a lot of contestations maybe a lot of us have in the way sirs explored the trajectory of the contributions of women members of the Constituent Assembly. But today, I think we'll probably have to conclude the session here. But this is just the beginning, because we have a very interesting lineup of workshops tomorrow, where we, in a way, actually explore and discuss the tenets of the preamble and the Constitution. Some of the debates he also mentioned today, be it the Hindu Code Bill, be it the Abducted Women's Recovery Bill, we'll sort of dissect it together and explore that if we think about the provisions of, be it preventive detention, be it Equality Code, how do we take it forward? What are the best practices? What is it for us that we take forward? But special thank you to India International Center for collaborating with us today. Thank you, Tete ma'am. Thank you for joining us today, and thank you for all the support and guidance you always provide us. Thank you to the tech team here. Thank you to all the distinguished guests who've joined us despite their busy schedule. Your guidance and support always encourages us as we celebrate these 25 years of WISCOMP's journey. Thank you, Dr. Gopinath, and of course, thank you, the WISCOMP team. Thank you, everyone, and hope to see you tomorrow.